Hello, welcome to my latest video. My name's Stuart, the Unrepentant Atheist, and what I want to talk about today is what I've noticed that Christians put a lot of emphasis on atheists who convert to Christianity. I've noticed this quite a lot in comments online, that when an atheist does convert, and the more important the atheist is in the conversion, the bigger a deal that Christians will make of it. Now, I've always taken the view that even if I'm the only atheist on the planet, I live in a world of believers. That it doesn't mean that I'm wrong in my view that there's insufficient evidence to support belief in God, even if I'm the last. That is my view. And if we go back to Christopher Hitchens, I remember him saying that if you hear that I've recanted on my deathbed, don't let it change your um, don't let it change your method for determining what is more likely to be true and what is more likely to be false. That if it takes the fear of death to make a Christian out of Christopher Hitchens, when in his healthy state of mind, with nothing to fear, he concluded that there was insufficient evidence to support the existence of God, belief in the existence of God. This was the correct position, and it did not weaken that position, even if fear of death would make him recant and convert to Christianity. And of course, no such thing happened. Christopher Hitchens did stay true to his method up until the last moments. As far as we know, his wife, I believe, has said that he certainly did not recant and convert, and he remained an atheist, obviously, until his last breath. It's not always the case. I personally know of a relative who was dying of cancer, and when he was 40, I had a discussion with him, and we talked about religion, and we agreed that it was mainly wishful thinking, and that there was insufficient evidence to support belief in God, or belief in an afterlife, or indeed in anything at all supernatural. He was a scientist, and he worked in MRI. He was one of the people who developed it in the 90s. And unfortunately, when he was about, I think, 38, 39, he developed cancer. He had an operation, and they told him that the operation went well, and if he survived 5 years, he would be home and dry. In other words, he could look forward to living the rest of his life without fear of that particular cancer coming back. Unfortunately, before that 5 years was up, the cancer returned. And I didn't, unfortunately, meet him in the last year of his life, but I heard from his wife that he went to stay at a Benedictine monastery, and he'd been raised a Catholic. And I understand, I'm not sure to what extent he converted back to Christianity, but I understand that he went to this Benedictine monastery and he took a lot of solace and comfort in the way that they looked after him. And I assume that, obviously, if he did that, that maybe he converted back to Christianity, converted to theism before he died. And obviously, some people do that. I can't say for certain that I wouldn't do it myself. That if I suddenly found myself with some horrible illness and I realised I only had a year to live, I don't know how I'm going to react to that. But I can say the same as Christopher Hitchens, that even if I change my mind and in the face of death, in my absolute fear of the unknown, that I convert to Christianity from atheism, from denying the existence of God, or saying I don't believe in God. If I convert for that reason, that it doesn't impact on the strength of my reasons at the moment for not believing in God, that case remains secure and I believe strong, and that it would be a weakness on my part. Understandable, of course, if I found myself dying and decided that I was so terrified that mentally and emotionally I just collapsed and became a believer. It would have no value whatsoever, in my opinion, for Christians. Well, of course, I'm not well known, but let's move to a what if scenario. And I like doing this. I know that a lot of people don't like what if scenarios, and if you don't like what if scenarios, then navigate away, go to another video. But so, what if a really big name atheist converted to Christianity, or converted back to Christianity? I remember on the Atheist Experience, Matt Dilahunty, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, somebody was saying to him, you make money out of this, you make money out of your channel, you make money out of appearing, etc. And he said, yes, he does. He makes appearance money because he's got no other way of making money, and he does it so well that he's in demand, and people will pay him for appearing. And whatever he makes, I think that he's worth the money, because he's done a wonderful job for skepticism and atheism. But he did imply that if he wanted to make really big money, he would know how to do it. And he expanded on that a bit, just a little bit. He suggested that there are Christian interests groups that would pay him a lot of money to convert and to stand up and say that he's no longer an atheist and he's accepted Jesus into his heart and he's converted back to Christianity, and that he was wrong and that he's sorry, but he's now devoting himself to spreading the word of Christ. He implied that there are organizations that would pay him a lot of money to take that position. And let's just suppose that there are such organizations, and there may well be individuals, very wealthy Christians, who would pay him to take that position and maintain it, maybe by some kind of installment method. In other words, they pay him a certain amount to first of all convert, and then they could pay him a certain amount of money every, say, 5 years. If he had children, it would be easier because they could bequeath them millions of dollars upon his death, on the condition that he does not recant and convert back to atheism. I know you might think it's an absurd scenario, but I know that a lot of Christians who are currently converting to atheism and rejecting theism, if they saw somebody like Matt Dilahunty come out and say, I'm converting to Christianity, I've converted, I've accepted Jesus, it might stop them from becoming atheists. Now, I believe that's absurd, because I don't think that they would have sound reasons for doing that. And I don't think that you should ever base your beliefs on what somebody else believes. So, but let's just supposing that this did happen and that a big name atheist came out and said, I'm now a Christian. I mean, an even bigger one than that, an obvious one, would be Richard Dawkins. Now, I would imagine that Richard Dawkins is fairly well financially secure. He's written many books, and I would imagine that he's worth millions of pounds, millions of dollars. I would think so, and that there's no amount of money really that would make him come out and say, against his true beliefs, that he now believes in God. I don't believe so. I don't even think that if you offered him $1 billion, which he could channel into his educational fund or something of that type, I don't believe that even that amount of money would make him pretend to be a Christian. And to be honest with you, I don't think that any amount of money would make Matt Dilahunty pretend to be a Christian either. But I'm just saying, supposing if there was somebody who was unscrupulous enough to take the money and say, I'm now a Christian, I can imagine that all the Christian organizations would be out there and saying, you see, Even the biggest atheists on the planet are converting to Christianity. This is the word of Jesus. This is how powerful Christianity is, that even a man who's been doing the devil's work for the last 15 years has seen the light, and hallelujah, he has converted to the true religion. This would be such fantastic propaganda, and it would be worth the millions that they would pay. It would be big news. It wouldn't be such big news if Matt Dilahunty converted, because he's more or less he's not really in the public eye in the same way that somebody like Richard Dawkins is. Because obviously Matt Dilahunty is he's a big YouTube personality, and he's well known in debate circles. But outside of that, he's probably not well known. If you went onto the streets of New York and said, you know who Matt Dilahunty is, you might find that only, I don't know, 1 in 50 people have even heard of him, maybe less than that. But if you went onto the streets and said, "Oh, have you heard of Richard Dawkins?" I would think that more would have done so. I mean, he's not quite the household name that would make him universally known, but he would certainly be much better known, and it would be a big scalp for the Christian camp if somebody like Richard Dawkins converted to Christianity. Now there have been some names who, of course, have converted to Christianity. I mean, there was Francis Collins, former head of the Human Genome Project. He converted. He had an experience. That wasn't massive news, but still, it was a good one for the Christian camp, because they could turn around and say, look, he's the head of the Human Genome Project. This scientist who accepts evolution and genetics has had an experience, and he now believes in the Holy Trinity, and he's a Christian, and he was an atheist. So scientists are now converting. This will be the propaganda. And they would say the same of Richard, because he's a scientist. And they would say, scientists are now converting en masse. They would squeeze it. They would really use it as much as possible. And the only effect that I think it would have is maybe for some wavering Christians who want to come over to theism, they might stop and think, I see what you mean. You know, scientists are coming around. I mean, even though it might just be 1 or 2 out of thousands or even millions, if they're big name enough, it might make some weaker-minded Christians who were going to come out and wavering, who were going to come to atheism, some of those who were weaker-minded, it might make them stay in the Christian camp. So it would be quite expensive propaganda if it was paid. And of course, if it was unpaid, if it was genuine that these big names came out and said they were Christians, then I suppose it would have the same propaganda value, because they would squeeze it and milk it for everything they could, even though they hadn't had to pay out for it. But of course, it goes the other way as well. So, I mean, for example, I can give you examples of big names who've converted from Christianity to atheism. Of course, there was a sportsman, a British triple jumper, Jonathan Edwards. I think he still holds the world record, but he was a brilliant athlete, and he was a Christian, and not just a Christian, but a kind of very active Christian in a sort of evangelical church. You know, one of these big smiling, happy Christians. You know what I mean. You've never seen such a joyful smile. I mean, Jesus, he just makes you feel so good, doesn't he? And so he was, in a way, propelled by his faith, and did some absolutely amazing things in athletics. His world records still stand. I mean, nobody can touch him. Go and look him up on YouTube, Jonathan Edwards triple jump. The way he jumps is just unbelievable. And in fact, about 10 years ago, he stunned the Christian world. Now, this was a big scalp. This was a big scalp for the atheist movement. It was a big moment, and he came out, and I think he gave a press conference, and he said he's lost his faith. He said he's no longer a Christian, and he's an atheist. And it was a huge blow. It was a huge blow for his family. it was a huge blow for all the Christian people that knew him. And in a way, it was a huge blow for the Christian movement, because they lost this shining example, this success, this Olympic gold medalist and world record holder. This amazing athlete was a standard bearer for Christianity, and they just suddenly lost him about 10, 12 years ago. And I saw him being interviewed. I think his interview was on YouTube somewhere. And he just said he lost his faith. He couldn't see that there was any evidence for the existence of God, and he couldn't see himself coming back to Christianity. And so that was that. So it's happening both ways. And the point is that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter to me, and it shouldn't matter to you. And frankly, it shouldn't matter to anybody. Because, as Matt Dilahunty has said, that the evidence or the lack of evidence is evident. That there's not the evidence, and that people who make these decisions to go one way or the other, of course, I say that if Christians are making the decision to step towards atheism and reject belief in the existence of God, I think they're making a sound decision, because I don't think the evidence is there. But when atheists are converting to Christianity, I don't think they're making a rational decision. I don't think Francis Collins made a rational decision when he fell to his knees, and I think he saw a waterfall divided into three and interpreted it as a Trinity. So, I mean, that's not evidence. It's not evidential. He's had a personal experience, and he's put an interpretation on it. And I'd like to think if I had that experience, I might put a different interpretation. And I might just say, oh, well, there are three columns. There are three columns of water there. I'm not going to hit my knees and say, oh my God, it's the Holy Trinity. God is speaking to me. That's irrational. And it's not evidence. It's poor evidence. You could call it evidence, because of course almost anything can be evidence, but there's good evidence and there's bad evidence, and I think that is bad evidence. But probably for Francis Collins was the evidence was the way that he felt when he saw the three columns, and he might have been in a state of mind where, who knows, he might have just been vulnerable at that particular time for an experience, and it affected him, and it made him believe in God. So I don't want to go on any further with this. I think I've made my point, and my point is that it may be important for Christians when atheists convert to Christianity, but I can tell you that for me, it's not important at all, one way or the other. It's not important for me when Christians convert to atheism, and it's also not important for me when atheists convert to Christianity. It adds absolutely zero to the debate and to the evidence. It's not evidence one way or the other. So when Christians say to me, as somebody did do recently, that there was a brain surgeon, Alexander Eden, I think his name was. Yeah, he's a brain surgeon, he's a scientist, and he's converted. He had an experience, a near-death experience, and he's arguing, he says there's an afterlife, and he's converted. And he put a lot of emphasis on the fact that he was a brain surgeon, that he's a scientist, that he's a doctor, he's a man of science. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he's an expert in, because he's got no evidence. He's got no evidence that can be scrutinized for the existence of God. It doesn't matter that he's a scientist. And it doesn't matter if somebody's not a scientist, because nobody is an expert in God's studies in the sense that they've got evidence sitting there which can be used and scrutinized. There are no authorities where God is concerned. This whole thing about Albert Einstein believed in God, it doesn't matter. He was a pantheist. It doesn't matter if he was a Christian. It doesn't matter if he got down and begged Jesus every night to be good to the poor. It doesn't matter if you found a letter by Albert Einstein saying, actually, I believe in Jesus. It makes no difference, one way or the other, who believes what, who converts, scientists or just ordinary everyday people. one way or the other. It makes absolutely no difference. If Christopher Hitchens had recanted on his deathbed, as he said, don't stick to the evidence, don't stick to what I say, don't stick to what I, but don't set store by what I tell you, look at the evidence. So we have to continually assess the evidence and proportion our beliefs to the weight of the evidence. Where is the evidence pointing? And from what I can see, the evidence is not pointing to the existence of a God. I doubt in the existence of a God just because there's not enough evidence. And even if 100% of scientists came out and said to me that there is a God, I would want to know how they reached that conclusion. I would want to see the evidence. And if they're just telling me it's on faith or because they've all had experiences, which, is most likely they probably would, or even if they put a philosophical argument in front of me, I would say, okay, well, there's a sound philosophical argument. Where's the evidence to back it up? So let's just conclude. Only the evidence matters, nothing else. And it shows, in my opinion, that Christians are feeling very, very vulnerable when they start pointing to atheists who've converted, or even better, famous atheist scientists who've converted to Christianity. When they start pointing and saying, this is why you should be a Christian, it demonstrates how incredibly weak their case is and how poor their evidence is that they're having to do this. And I never point to Christians who've converted to atheism. I never talk about the organization of former priests and pastors who've left Christianity in disgust. I never talk about all the pastors who were actually writing anonymous letters saying they're only staying in the community because there's no life for them outside of the community, but actually they're atheists and they're doing a pastor's job, and there are plenty of them. It makes no difference. That's no evidence to refute the existence of God. So when I refute the existence of God, it's only based on lack of evidence, no other reason. And I think that Christians should hold true to that principle as well. So tell me what you think. I've got no more to say about this. I've said enough already. All my videos are far too long. I do apologize. I talk far too much. But subscribe to my channel if you like. If you've enjoyed this and you want to see more content, leave me a thumbs up, a comment if you want. And for now, I'll say goodbye. I look forward to seeing you next time.